The day they demolished my great-grandfather's bridge was the day I resolved to turn their $4 million lakefront resort into a muddy parking lot. It is 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I am savoring my coffee on the dock when I hear the deep growl of diesel engines. Peering through the morning mist, I spot a bulldozer advancing toward the stone bridge my great-grandfather constructed with his own two hands in 1923. This was the very bridge that had been the link for our community for a century, the same bridge that some power-obsessed HOA president had deemed an eyesore. What Linda Prescott and her pretentious HOA board were unaware of, however, pertained to water rights in Texas. My great-grandfather didn't merely construct that bridge, he also held control over the dam. I had just inherited an asset far more potent than any HOA bylaw, the legal entitlement to drain their entire lake. My name is Jake Morrison. As a civil engineer, I inherited the most stunning piece of lakeside property imaginable 3 months ago. My great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, erected our family cabin in 1920, shortly after his return from the Great War. Yet, his true masterpiece was the bridge. Sam didn't simply throw together some wood and declare it finished. The man hand-hewed limestone blocks from the nearby quarry and built a formal stone arch bridge, connecting our portion of the lake to the main road. For 100 years, that bridge was a lifeline for everyone. Fishermen on their way to preferred spots, children walking to swimming areas, and neighbors offering mutual aid. It was the very soul of our small community. Upon inheriting the property, my wife Sarah and I were filled with dreams. We had been saving every last cent, with plans to retire there within a few years. I would renovate the cabin, perhaps engage in some consulting from home, and dedicate my mornings to fishing from that old wooden dock. The creak of its weathered planks beneath my boots was like a soothing melody. Then, Linda Prescott entered the picture. Linda is the type of woman who dons pearls for a trip to the supermarket and operates a spotless white BMW that has never encountered a dirt road. She took up residence in the Whispering Pines luxury community 2 years prior, the upscale development that had materialized on the opposite side of the lake like mushrooms after a downpour. Within just 6 months, she had schemed her way into the HOA presidency. I should have anticipated trouble when the first certified letter arrived. The envelope possessed that formal heft, the kind that makes your stomach plummet before you've even opened it. Inside, on Linda's overly sweet letterhead, was a declaration that my bridge was in violation of community architectural standards and needed to be removed. I actually laughed, a genuine loud laugh. My bridge predated her development, which was once cow pasture. But Linda believed she had done her research. The letter referred to HOA Covenant Number 47B, outlining architectural review requirements, and threatened me with daily fines of $500 if the bridge wasn't gone in 30 days. That's when I began sifting through boxes in my grandfather's attic, filled with brittle, old papers that carried the scent of dust and the ages, but were legal documents all the same. I located the original survey maps, the deed records, and, most critically, the grandfathering clause that offered specific protection to pre-existing structures. My bridge was literally older than the HOA by 8 decades. Armed with my documents, I attended the subsequent HOA meeting at the community center. You know that distinct aroma of institutional facilities, floor wax, stale coffee, and a subtle hint of disappointment. That was my foray into HOA politics. I laid out my documents on the folding table as if playing a triumphant poker hand. "Gentlemen, ladies," I began, "I believe a misunderstanding has occurred." Linda gave my papers a cursory glance. Her reply still makes my blood boil. "Times change, Mr. Morrison. Progress demands sacrifice." She delivered the line with a condescending smile, as if she were clarifying simple arithmetic to a toddler. The board's vote was a predictable outcome, 5-2 in favor of enforcement. Linda's supporters, all newcomers with more wealth than sense, outnumbered the longtime residents who still valued the meaning of community. Walking back to my truck after the meeting, the sound of gravel crunching under my boots, I came to an important realization. This wasn't about building standards or a community vision. This was a matter of power. Linda viewed my modest bridge, my working-class cabin, and my old pickup truck and concluded I didn't align with her concept of an affluent neighborhood. She wanted me out. Sarah attempted to remain hopeful. "We'll get through this together," she said during dinner, her hand squeezing mine across our small kitchen table. "The law is on your side." I smiled and nodded, but I was privately questioning whether being correct would be sufficient. What I didn't realize yet was that Linda had initiated a conflict with the wrong engineer. You see, my expertise wasn't limited to building codes and property law. I also understood water. Linda didn't hesitate to escalate from threats to direct action. 3 days following that board meeting, as I was leaving for work, I noticed two men in identical polo shirts standing near my property's edge. Security guards at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. "Morning, gentlemen," I called, my coffee mug in hand. "Are you lost?" The older one, who had the build of a former linebacker, produced a clipboard. "HOA Compliance Patrol, sir. We're here to document violations." I nearly spat out my coffee. Violations of what? Grass height exceeds the HOA standard of 3 inches in several areas. The dock is in need of repainting according to aesthetic guidelines. The storage shed requires pressure washing. He rattled off the list as if it were for groceries. Over the following 2 weeks, these individuals cited me for nearly everything imaginable. My mailbox was apparently an incorrect shade of black. My welcome mat did not conform to size regulations. They even issued a notice for a fishing net being visible from the road. By the 3rd week, I was facing $1,200 in fines. That's when I did what any proficient engineer does when confronted with a problem. I examined the system. It turned out that Linda's husband, Rick, was the owner of Prescott Security Solutions. Amusing, isn't it? The HOA was compensating her husband's firm $3,000 per month to badger homeowners into compliance. I dedicated an evening to the state contractor licensing website and made an interesting discovery. Rick's security license had lapsed 6 months prior. He had been conducting his business illegally the entire time. Herein lies a valuable piece of information. In Texas, HOA security personnel must be licensed, the same as any private security company, and a surprising number are not. It is always wise to verify their credentials before they can cite you for anything. But my investigation wasn't finished. I called in a favor from a friend who specializes in commercial inspections. We took a brief stroll around Linda's immaculate property one Saturday morning. The extension on her deck lacked permits. Her pool house was constructed 6 inches past the setback line. And that elaborate Japanese garden she took such pride in? According to the original survey I had uncovered, it encroached 3 feet onto my property. Linda had been trespassing for the past 3 years. The following Monday, I submitted complaints to the state licensing board regarding Rick's security firm and formally requested a comprehensive survey of the property boundary. I did it without any fanfare, treating it like any other engineering task. Document everything, adhere to the correct procedures, and let the evidence speak for itself. Linda's reaction was what I expected. Within a week, I began to overhear whispers at the local hardware store. "Jake Morrison is being difficult. He's diminishing property values with that unsightly bridge. Some people just can't accept progress." Sarah returned from the grocery store one Thursday with a look of frustration. "The cashier would barely look at me," she reported, "and Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop treated me as if I were contagious." That's when the anonymous complaints began to pour in. Someone alerted the county that my bridge was structurally compromised. Another informant claimed I was disposing of chemicals into the lake, a notion that was particularly amusing given that I am an environmental engineer who professionally tests water quality. But this is where Linda committed her first significant error. While she was occupied with her role as a neighborhood political operator, I was engaged in my area of expertise, reviewing technical documents. I had filed a public records request for all materials concerning water rights and dam operations related to our lake. What I uncovered in those dusty county archives made me sit upright in my kitchen chair. There were maps I hadn't seen before, depicting water flow patterns from the 1920s, engineering reports from my great-grandfather's time, and, most compellingly, documentation of something referred to as secondary water rights that had never been transferred to the HOA. I spent that weekend circumnavigating the lake with a surveyor's perspective, truly observing the water's movement. The resort Linda constantly praised, the one intended to elevate our community, had a critical flaw. Its entire operation was contingent on stable water levels. Their boat docks, their lakeside dining area, their million-dollar water features, all of it was predicated on the lake remaining at its current level. The odor of diesel fuel from their construction equipment still lingered in the air, and the irony was palpable. Linda was so fixated on my small stone bridge that she had completely overlooked the larger context. I returned home that evening with a new grasp of my predicament. Linda believed she was in a game of chess, maneuvering her HOA pawns to corner me. She didn't comprehend that I wasn't merely another homeowner to be intimidated. I was the person who understood how the water worked. Linda's subsequent action arrived with the subtlety of a runaway freight train. I was in my home office one Tuesday morning when I heard the sound of trucks arriving outside. Not a single truck, but 3 county vehicles, accompanied by a man in a hard hat holding the type of clipboard that signals a ruined day. Jake Morrison? The inspector seemed as if he would prefer to be anywhere else. Anonymous report about structural issues with your bridge. I'm here to perform a safety assessment. An anonymous report. Of course, I could almost detect the scent of Linda's pricey perfume on the morning breeze. The inspection lasted 4 hours. The poor inspector meticulously examined every inch of my great-grandfather's stonework with calipers and moisture detectors. Upon finishing, he had the courtesy to appear chagrined. "Mr. Morrison, your bridge is as sturdy as the day it was constructed." Yet, he consulted his clipboard. Current regulations mandate seismic reinforcement for structures of this scale. The estimated cost for compliance is $3,000. You have 10 days to provide improvement plans, or we will be forced to condemn it. $3,000 for earthquake preparedness in Texas, where the most significant seismic activity in recent history was the blasting for the new highway. But this is where Linda demonstrated her cunning. The inspector gave me a business card along with the citation. Prescott Construction can perform the work. Rick Prescott quoted me $12,000. He says he can complete it within a week. I looked at the business card as if it were a venomous snake. Rick Prescott, Linda's husband, offering to resolve the issue his wife had manufactured for a fee of $12,000. Such a coincidence. That evening, I initiated a series of phone calls. I started with the State Contractor Licensing Board, where a very cooperative woman named Maria looked up Rick's file. "Sir, Mr. Prescott's contractor license lapsed 24 months ago. He is not legally permitted to undertake construction work for hire." My next call was to my friend at the county building department. "Jake, that seismic mandate only pertains to new constructions and significant renovations. Pre-existing structures are grandfathered in unless they are demonstrably unsafe. Here is your second piece of valuable knowledge. Water rights in the American West frequently predate contemporary property laws. They can override HOA regulations, zoning laws, and occasionally even eminent domain. With this information, I chose to delve further into those water rights documents. What I discovered in the county archives made my hands tremble. My great-grandfather had not only constructed a bridge and a cabin, he had also possessed secondary water rights for the entire lake system, granted when this area was still ranch land. These rights included what was termed flow management authority. In simple terms, I had the legal power to regulate the volume of water in the lake. I spent the next 2 days poring over engineering reports from the 1920s dam construction. Truly fascinating material. The original engineers had incorporated bypass channels capable of diverting water around the main dam. My great-grandfather's bridge was not merely for transit. It was strategically located to manage a secondary spillway system. Meanwhile, Linda was engrossed in her campaign to tarnish my reputation. She had somehow persuaded 3 of my neighbors that I was unstable and possibly a danger. I returned home one evening to see new security cameras aimed squarely at my property from 2 separate houses. Sarah was the first to notice. "Honey, Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't even acknowledge me anymore." And Tom from the marina acted as if I had the plague when I went to buy bait. The breaking point was when Linda sought a restraining order, alleging I had made menacing remarks about the dam and constituted a clear and present danger to the community's safety. The judge reviewed her evidence, which consisted solely of my public records requests and my inquiries at HOA meetings, and dismissed the case. But the harm had been inflicted. Half the neighborhood now viewed me as some sort of unhinged domestic extremist. It was then that I unearthed a detail that altered the entire situation. While examining the resort's environmental impact study, I noticed something in the small print. Their bank loan contained very precise conditions regarding water levels. If the lake fell below a specified depth, Their entire $4 million loan would become instantly payable. The resort's grand opening was just 3 months away. Deposits had been taken for weddings, corporate functions, and fishing competitions. Linda's family had put $500,000 of their own funds into the endeavor. I sat in my kitchen that night, gazing at those loan documents, and had a profound realization. Linda believed she was engaged in a conflict over HOA regulations and property aesthetics. But she had challenged someone who understood the one element her entire development was built on. Water is indifferent to HOA bylaws. It behaves according to the laws of physics and legal history, and I was starting to grasp that I wielded more influence than any HOA president could ever imagine. The metallic flavor of stress had been my constant companion for weeks. But that night, it was supplanted by something entirely different, the flavor of opportunity. Linda's patience finally gave out the week before Thanksgiving. As I was checking my mail, I saw her striding across the street in her absurd white heels, holding another manila envelope as if it contained nuclear launch codes. "Mr. Morrison." Her voice was sharp enough to slice glass. "I am convening an emergency HOA meeting. Your bridge poses an immediate safety hazard that cannot be deferred through normal processes." She pushed the envelope at me with enough vigor to inflict a paper cut. Inside was a notification for a crisis intervention meeting set for the following evening. The agenda was straightforward: to vote on authorizing the immediate removal of the bridge, with or without my permission. The meeting was a complete spectacle. Linda had brought in her golf associate from Dallas, a man who professed to be a structural engineer but had never laid eyes on my bridge, yet was more than willing to pronounce it a death trap. His talk was peppered with terms like catastrophic failure risk and imminent public danger. Highly professional. The vote was rapid and brutal, 7-1 for immediate demolition. The single dissenting vote was from Mrs. Chun, an 80-year-old resident who had been here since the 1960s. The rest had either been bought, coerced, or persuaded that I was some kind of deranged bridge builder. "The contractor will commence work tomorrow morning," Linda declared with thinly veiled triumph. "Removal costs of $15,000 will be charged to Mr. Morrison's account. If payment is not made within 30 days, a lien will be issued on the property. $15,000 to demolish something my great-grandfather had constructed with his own hands." I drove back in a daze, the rough feel of my steering the only thing keeping me connected to reality. Sarah saw my expression and poured 2 glasses of wine without uttering a word. That night, I took a step I had never taken in my engineering career. I filed for an emergency injunction in county court, not out of confidence in its success, but because I had exhausted all other avenues. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. the next morning, the exact time Linda's contractor was scheduled to begin the demolition. I entered the courthouse at 8:30 a.m., carrying a banker's box overflowing with documents, water rights records, contractor licensing violations, proof of HOA fund misuse, and structural reports demonstrating my bridge was safer than most county roads. Judge Martinez heard the case for precisely 12 minutes before rendering his verdict. Emergency injunction granted. A 30-day temporary restraining order is now in effect. Mr. Morrison, you have 1 month to address this issue through appropriate legal means. I telephoned Linda from the courthouse parking lot. The demolition is off, I informed her. You should probably notify your contractor. The ensuing silence was so prolonged I thought she had disconnected. Then, this means war, Mr. Morrison. I trust you are aware of that. Here is knowledge nugget number 3. Emergency injunctions can stop HOA actions if you can prove immediate, irreversible damage, but you must have documented proof, not just strong emotions. That afternoon, I found something that made Linda's declaration of war seem almost comical. I was examining the HOA's financial records, which are public information, by the way, when I observed some curious irregularities. In the last year, Linda had approved $30,000 for legal advice and emergency contractor work. Every single payment was made to companies owned by her husband or her brother-in-law. I spent the weekend acting as a forensic accountant, comparing each payment with business licenses and corporate records. Linda had not only been using HOA money to harass me, she had been treating the community's finances like her personal savings account. But the true breakthrough occurred when I located the lake's original engineering survey from 1923. My great-grandfather hadn't just constructed a bridge. He had designed it as a control point for what the old records referred to as secondary flow management. The bridge wasn't merely a way to cross the water. It was an integral part of a larger water control system that included the main dam. I dedicated hours to studying those aged blueprints, the musty aroma of old paper filling my kitchen as I traced the water flow lines with my finger. The deeper my understanding of the original design became, the more I understood that Linda had made a monumental error in judgment. She believed she was confronting some working-class individual with a stubborn attitude. But my great-grandfather had been the lead engineer for this entire lake system. He had engineered redundancy and control into every component, his bridge included. That Sunday evening, I contacted my former professor from A&M, an expert in historical water rights law. After I laid out the situation, he remained silent for a considerable time. "Jake," he eventually said, "if your account is correct, you don't just possess a bridge. You possess water management authority for that entire lake system. This is no longer an HOA issue. This is a matter of federal water rights law." I ended the call and walked out to my dock. The November air was crisp and clean, with the scent of approaching winter. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile. Linda had declared war, but she had no concept of the arsenal I was preparing to deploy. The lake level fell precisely 18.5 inches over the following 6 hours. By dusk, the resort's million-dollar boat docks were grounded in mud, and their grand opening weekend was formally off. The bank called in their loan that very evening. But that's the nature of water. It is patient and impartial. Within 24 hours, I had returned the lake to its normal flow. The investors, now extremely keen to negotiate with the individual who held sway over their water source, presented an offer I could genuinely respect. "Mr. Morrison," stated James Chun, the principal investor, "we wish to suggest a partnership. You preserve your bridge as a historical monument. We receive assured water levels, and it's a win-win for everyone." 3 months on, the resort had its grand reopening under fresh leadership. Linda had vanished. The last I heard, she relocated to Arizona after being confronted with federal charges for attempted bribery and the misuse of HOA funds. Her husband, Rick, had his contractor's license revoked for good and was forced to sell their home to cover legal expenses. The new HOA board, headed by Mrs. Chun and Tom Rodriguez, created the Morrison Bridge Historic District. My great-grandfather's bridge became the focal point of a community heritage trail that attracted more visitors than Linda's vision of an exclusive resort ever could have. Property values did not plummet as Linda had foretold. In fact, they rose. It appears that people prefer to live in places with genuine history and supportive neighbors, rather than in corporate-style developments managed like personal fiefdoms. Sarah and I leveraged our newfound local fame to create the Samuel Morrison Water Rights Scholarship for engineering students at Texas A&M, supported by speaking fees from the numerous water rights conferences where I've shared this tale. It has already assisted 5 students in pursuing environmental engineering. The inaugural recipient was Maria Rodriguez, Tom's daughter, who aims to specialize in sustainable water management. She is set to graduate next spring and has already secured a role with the State Water Authority. The awards ceremony was, fittingly, held on the bridge, with the whole community celebrating. Tom was promoted to resort manager and reinstated all the staff Linda had dismissed during her tyrannical tenure. The resort now contributes 5% of its profits to local schools and hosts an annual Bridge Day festival to honor our community's heritage. Frank Wilson came out of retirement to instruct me on advanced dam operations, and I have since become the official water management consultant for 3 other lake communities wrestling with similar HOA conflicts. It seems there are many Lindis in the world and numerous forgotten water rights waiting to be brought to light. The legal precedent we established has been referenced in 12 other federal water rights cases throughout Texas. Patricia informs me we have likely saved dozens of communities from being overrun by developers who believe that money could nullify century-old laws. My bridge is now officially on the National Register of Historic Places. Each morning, I walk over the limestone blocks my great-grandfather set with his own hands, and I can almost fancy I hear him laughing about how his water management design ultimately saved the day. The resort is flourishing. The community is more unified than ever, and our small lake has become a shining example of how progress and history can harmoniously coexist when people opt for collaboration over control. Linda's saga turned into a cautionary lesson on the perils of unchecked HOA authority. Last month, the state legislature enacted the Morrison Act, which mandates that all HOA boards must honor pre-existing water rights and historical structures. They are small triumphs, but they accumulate. Sarah and I are anticipating the arrival of our first child next spring. They will grow up dashing across that old stone bridge, learning to fish from the same dock where I was taught by my grandfather. Certain legacies are worth defending, even when the odds seem insurmountable. The best outcome is that our new neighbors genuinely appreciate having us here. We have become the designated hosts for community cookouts, and I've assisted 3 other homeowners in resolving their own HOA issues without anyone needing to drain a lake. But if you find yourself in your own HOA predicament, keep this in mind. Knowledge is power, history is significant, and at times, the most effective tool against bureaucratic intimidation is a superior understanding of the law. The sound of children's laughter now bounces off the old stone bridge, blending with the gentle lapping of water that knows precisely where it ought to be. Friday morning descended with a type of mayhem that makes you doubt your senses. I was enjoying coffee on my porch when 3 sheriff's deputies arrived, with Linda right behind them in her immaculate BMW, flanked by 2 men in costly suits who practically radiated federal lawyers. Jake Morrison, the deputy in charge, stated with an apologetic tone, "We have a warrant for your arrest on allegations of criminal threatening and conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism." Environmental terrorism, for asserting legal water rights my family had possessed for a century. Patricia had foreseen this possibility. Within 2 hours, I was released on bond and seated in her Austin office as she skillfully navigated the federal bureaucracy. It turned out that Linda's Blackstone attorneys had persuaded a federal judge that my water rights represented an imminent danger to interstate commerce and environmental balance. The restraining order was all-encompassing. I was forbidden from going near the dam, operating any water controls, or even mentioning water management publicly. Linda had effectively used the federal court system to disarm me of my sole point of leverage. But Patricia smiled as she reviewed the complete order. "Jake, they've just made a colossal blunder. This restraining order confirms that your water rights are real. They are merely being temporarily suspended. That is a federal acknowledgement of your claim." Within 6 hours, Patricia had initiated her own federal lawsuit, claiming a violation of water rights under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. More significantly, she had secured a counter-injunction that took precedence over the local restraining order. "Federal water rights always trump local criminal charges," she clarified. "Linda's legal team has provided us with the exact precedent we require. Here is an essential piece of knowledge. Federal enforcement of water rights can supersede local law enforcement when historical claims precede the establishment of state and local authority." But Linda was not finished with her scorched earth tactics. That afternoon, I learned she had engaged a private security firm to monitor the dam area around the clock. This was no ordinary security company. They were ex-military contractors who appeared to have walked straight out of an action film. Sarah returned from the grocery store with information that made my stomach clench. "Honey, there are news vans at the end of our road, and Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Linda has been telling everyone you intend to poison the water supply." Poison the water supply. Linda had officially escalated from harassment to outright defamation. The media frenzy erupted over the weekend. Local news channels aired segments on domestic eco-terrorism and water rights extremism. Linda made appearances on 3 different news shows, portraying herself as a dedicated community leader safeguarding innocent families from a disturbed individual with dangerous knowledge. However, the media focus cut both ways. By Sunday, property rights groups from all over Texas were phoning to lend their support. Environmental attorneys offered their services pro bono. Even some resort staff were discreetly getting in touch to express their backing of my stance. The community was divided. Long-standing residents who recalled my great-grandfather stood by my family's heritage. More recent residents, anxious about their property values plummeting, aligned with Linda's development goals. Monday delivered the ultimate measure Linda had been preparing. The HOA board convened an emergency community protection meeting to sanction any and all actions required to deny me access to the dam. They had, in essence, voted to employ armed guards to prevent me from utilizing federally protected water rights. That's when Frank Wilson made a move that altered the course of everything. He called me at 6 a.m. with a proposition that made my hands tremble. Jake, I've been running this dam for 30 years. I've never witnessed such a fiasco over something so straightforward. I am retiring, effective immediately, and I am putting you forward as the interim dam operator under your water rights authority. Interim dam operator, with federal water rights and official operational command. Linda's private security could not legally prevent me from conducting routine upkeep, which included testing the secondary flow channels. The last element fell into place when Tom Rodriguez called with intelligence that would permanently shatter Linda's credibility. He had been secretly recording his interactions with the sheriff's department, capturing Linda's attempt at bribery. Jake, she proposed $15,000 to me yesterday. She said if I could make it appear as though you had sabotaged the controls yourself, she would ensure I received a promotion and a salary increase. I have it all on tape. $15,000 for perjured testimony. Linda had escalated from civil disagreements to federal felony offenses. That evening, I sat with Sarah on our dock, heating the soft splash of water against the supports. The scent of an impending rainstorm was thick in the air, and I could feel the electricity of the approaching tempest. Tomorrow is the day, I said to her. Linda has made her decision, and now it's my turn to make mine. Sarah squeezed my hand. Your great-grandfather would be proud. Sometimes, defending what is right requires difficult decisions. On Tuesday morning, Linda would discover that some conflicts are not determined by who has the most expensive attorneys or the most prominent media presence. Sometimes, they are determined by who has the deepest understanding of the law, the physics of water, and the significance of family legacy. Tuesday morning broke sharp and cold, the kind of day that makes everything appear clearer, more distinct. I got to the dam at 8 a.m. with Patricia, Frank, and a small contingent of media personnel who had been covering the saga. Linda was already present with her private security detail, 3 sheriff's deputies, and enough lawyers to populate a small firm. She had placed herself between me and the dam controls, like a sort of environmental custer making her final stand. You shall not pass, she declared to the assembled onlookers, her voice carrying that specific tone of desperation masked as authority. I am defending this community from a dangerous person who poses a threat to our way of life. Channel 8 News had their cameras rolling. The county sheriff himself had arrived to supervise what everyone anticipated would be the decisive encounter. Even a few resort investors had come down from Dallas, likely calculating their potential financial losses. I approached the concrete structure that housed the bypass controls, carrying a folder that contained a century's worth of legal papers and Frank's official letter delegating dam operation authority to me. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the crowd, my voice clear in the morning air. I am here to conduct routine maintenance on the secondary water management systems that have been under my family's operation since 1923. Linda positioned herself directly in my path, so close that I could detect her costly perfume mingled with the sharp odor of panicked sweat. I possess a federal restraining order that bars you from this equipment. Patricia advanced gracefully, presenting a document to the sheriff. Your Honor, that restraining order was nullified by a federal water rights enforcement action late yesterday. Mr. Morrison holds complete legal authority to manage these systems. The sheriff examined the document, gave a nod, and moved away. Ma'am, he has federal authority here. You must step back. It was at this point that Linda completely lost her composure. This is preposterous, she yelled at the cameras. You're going to allow this madman to ruin a $4 million investment over some document from 1923? Individuals like him have no place in our community. Individuals like him. On live television, Linda had just laid bare the true nature of this conflict. It was never about HOA regulations, architectural standards, or community safety. It was about social class, about who was deemed worthy to exist in her vision of an exclusive lakeside utopia. I knelt beside the concrete housing and started to take off the access panel with the tools Frank had supplied. Each bolt loosened with a metallic click of finality, and I could sense the crowd holding a collective breath. Mr. Morrison, a reporter from Channel 8 called out. Can you tell us precisely what you are doing? I am activating secondary flow channels that were designed by my great-grandfather in 1923. I answered, keeping my eyes on my task. These channels facilitate a controlled discharge of surplus water during maintenance. Everything I am doing is fully lawful under federal water rights and standard dam operation protocols. The access panel came off, exposing the large brass wheel that managed the bypass valves. Frank had lubricated the mechanism the previous week, and it rotated with remarkable smoothness for a device nearly a century old. Linda made one last, desperate effort to intervene. "Sheriff, he's planning to drain our lake. He's vandalizing private property. Arrest him." Sheriff Martinez regarded her with the patient demeanor of a man accustomed to an excess of HOA conflicts. "Ma'am, this falls under federal jurisdiction and constitutes legal dam operations. I cannot arrest a man for turning a valve he is legally authorized to use." I gave the wheel 3 complete turns clockwise. Deep within the dam structure, century-old machinery engaged exactly as Samuel Morrison had intended. Water started to rush through the secondary channels with a profound, guttural roar that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The crowd observed, captivated, as the lake level began to visibly decrease. Within 20 minutes, the waterline could be seen retreating from the resort's dock supports. Linda stood motionless, witnessing her $4 million investment literally wash away. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was a mere whisper. "You can't do this. You can't simply ruin everything we've created." I rose, dusted off my hands, and turned to the cameras for my concluding remarks. "Mrs. Prescott, I proposed a compromise. I proposed negotiation. I proposed respect for both your investment and my family's heritage. You opted for war instead. This is the consequence of losing a battle over water rights." The resort's boat docks were already becoming inaccessible. By nightfall, the entire shoreline would be exposed mud. Linda's grand opening, planned for the next weekend, was now set to be a complete failure. But the most satisfying sound of the morning was not the surging water or the snapping of cameras. It was Mrs. Chen's voice, ringing out clearly to the crowd. "Welcome home, Jake. Your great-grandfather would be so proud." On Monday morning, I headed to the county archives with the kind of sharp focus I typically reserve for significant engineering endeavors. The clerk, a patient woman named Dorothy who had been working there since the Carter era, assisted me in retrieving every file related to the 1923 dam construction. What I uncovered was a game-changer. Tucked away in a folder labeled Historical Water Management, Lake Morrison System was the original construction contract, not just for the dam, but for the entire water control network. My great-grandfather, Samuel Morrison, was not merely a farmer who constructed a bridge. He was the lead hydraulic engineer for the entire undertaking. The pivotal document was a water rights agreement from March 15, 1923. In legal terminology that required 3 careful readings to fully grasp, it awarded Samuel Morrison and his descendants perpetual secondary water rights, which included flow management authority for Lake Morrison and its connected streams. Flow management authority. Those 3 words signified that I didn't just have permission to use the water, I had the legal power to determine the lake's water level. But the real revelation was yet to come. The resort's bank loan papers, which were public information due to county tax breaks they had received, contained specific performance requirements. If the lake level fell more than 18 inches below full capacity for over 72 hours, the entire $4 million construction loan would become immediately payable. 18 inches. I quickly did the calculations. The lake was presently 22 inches below the spillway. By opening the secondary channels my great-grandfather had engineered, I could lower it another 18 inches in approximately 6 hours. The resort had already accepted over $200,000 in deposits for its grand opening weekend. Wedding receptions, corporate functions, fishing competitions, all were booked with the expectation of a pristine lakeside setting. Linda's family had personally contributed $500,000 to the venture. Her husband, Rick, had co-signed the loan, leveraging their home as security. As I sat in that archive room, surrounded by the scent of old paper and bureaucratic dust, I understood that I was in possession of a nuclear option in a water rights conflict. The ethical implications struck me at once. This was no longer just about Linda. The resort provided jobs for 43 individuals, as I had confirmed: waitstaff, groundskeepers, boat operators, and cleaning crews. Most were locals who depended on that income. Yet, Linda had made the conflict deeply personal. She had attempted to obliterate a piece of my family's history spanning 4 generations. She had misused community money for personal gain. She had set neighbors against one another and ruled our small lake community as if it were her own private domain. I spent that afternoon examining the old dam structure, viewing it for the first time through an engineer's eyes rather than just as a nostalgic grandson. The 1920s construction was remarkable in its simplicity. Samuel Morrison had integrated manual bypass valves into the original framework, now concealed by decades of moss and rust, but still operational. The irony was exquisite. Linda had battled me for months over HOA architectural rules, all while her resort stood upon a water system that I could manipulate with a few rotations of a century-old valve. That evening, I arrived at a decision that would shape all subsequent events. I would not deploy this ultimate measure right away. Linda was entitled to one last opportunity to de-escalate, a chance to negotiate as rational adults, not as schoolyard aggressors. But if she declined, if she persisted in her aggressive tactics and attempts to ruin my family's heritage, then Linda was on the verge of learning that some conflicts are not won by the side with the most expensive lawyers or the most ambitious development projects. Sometimes, they are won by the one who best comprehends the physics of water and the significance of history. I returned to my cabin that evening with a peculiar sense of tranquility. For the first time in months, I was no longer the underdog. I was not the person being pushed around by arbitrary authority and bureaucratic pressure. I was the person who could drain their lake. The next morning, I began to gather my support. The first call was to Patricia Gomez, a water rights lawyer in Austin who specialized in historical claims. Her reputation was formidable. She had successfully defended ranchers against corporate water takeovers and possessed a knowledge of Texas water law superior to most judges. "Jake," she remarked after I had detailed the circumstances, "if your papers are legitimate, you're not just holding a good hand. You're holding a royal flush in a game where the others believe they're playing checkers." Patricia took the case on a contingency basis, a clear indicator of her confidence. She planned to drive up the following weekend to examine the documents and evaluate our legal standing. Next, I contacted Frank Wilson, the veteran who had managed the dam for 3 decades. Frank had actually worked with men who had been taught the system by my great-grandfather. If anyone grasped the practical mechanics of the water controls, it was him. "Your granddaddy was a sharp fellow," Frank remarked over coffee at the diner. "He built in redundancy everywhere. These new people at the resort, they don't even know those bypass channels are there. They haven't been touched since the drought of '86. Frank consented to give me a full tour of the system and show me precisely how the manual controls functioned. Crucially, he verified that my intended actions were not only legal, but also fell within the scope of normal dam operations. My support network was expanding. Mrs. Chun, the elderly neighbor who had been my sole supporter on the HOA board, put me in touch with Tom Rodriguez, a maintenance worker at the resort. Tom was in a difficult position. He needed his job, but he had grown up fishing from my great-grandfather's bridge and understood its importance to the community. "Most of us employees know Linda is trouble," Tom admitted. "She treats the staff like inferiors and the local contractors with contempt. But we can't risk our jobs over our beliefs." Sarah's sister, Monica, a paralegal in Dallas, offered her assistance with research. In just 2 days, she had assembled a thorough file on Linda's financial misconduct and HOA rule-breaking. The proof was irrefutable. Linda had effectively been embezzling community funds for months. Here is what I discovered about building a legal defense. Water rights attorneys can charge upwards of $300 an hour, but historical claims can be worth millions if you possess the necessary documentation. During her weekend visit, Patricia outlined our negotiation strategy. We would propose a face-saving solution to Linda. I retain my bridge. She gains architectural oversight for all future construction. The resort receives guaranteed minimum water levels, and Linda can claim a win for upholding community standards. But we also readied the ultimate option. If Linda declined to negotiate, I had the legal right to use my water management authority. Patricia clarified that this could involve routine maintenance of the secondary flow channels, which would coincidentally entail releasing enough water to lower the lake level below the resort's loan threshold. The timing was perfect. The spring runoff was tapering off, meaning any water I released would not be naturally refilled for several months. By the time the lake recovered, the resort would have lost its entire summer season. Frank guided me through the mechanics on a quiet Tuesday morning. The bypass valves were concealed within a concrete structure that appeared to be part of the original dam. Your granddaddy designed this so one man with simple tools could operate it, Frank noted. Turn this wheel clockwise. Water goes through the secondary channel. Turn it back. The flow ceases. I rehearsed the procedure until I could do it with my eyes shut. The wheel moved with remarkable smoothness for something that had been idle for decades, a tribute to Samuel Morrison's engineering. We set our schedule. I would offer Linda one final chance to negotiate at the upcoming HOA meeting, a clear, fair proposal presented before witnesses. If she agreed, it would be a win for everyone. If she refused or took further aggressive action, I would exercise my water rights. The following Monday morning, Monica had all the documentation prepared for media dissemination: property records, water rights certificates, evidence of Linda's financial wrongdoing, and a clear timeline of her escalating harassment. If this became public, we intended for the narrative to be unambiguous: a reasonable homeowner versus a corrupt HOA president. Sarah and I spent Sunday evening on our dock, observing the sunset cast a golden-red hue over the lake. The sound of water lapping against the supports was calming, but I could sense the impending change. "Are you certain about this?" Sarah inquired, her hand finding mine. I squeezed her fingers and savored the evening air, sweet with the promise of summer. Linda made this decision when she deemed my family's heritage expendable. I'm merely ensuring she comprehends the repercussions. Tomorrow, Linda would have her last chance to conclude the conflict she had initiated. After that, the lake itself would determine who truly held the power. Linda must have felt a shift in the air. 3 days before the planned HOA meeting, I received a call from Patricia with news that turned my coffee to ash. "Jake, they've brought in Blackstone and Associates from Dallas. That's a $2,000 an hour law firm that specializes in demolishing property rights claims. Someone is taking this fight very seriously." Blackstone had wasted no time, filing motions to contest my water rights papers, asserting that the 1923 agreements were outdated and nullified by modern zoning regulations. They had also sought an emergency hearing to get my injunction lifted, claiming I was an environmental risk to the lake's ecosystem. But Linda's desperation was manifesting in other ways as well. Rumors were circulating that she had been phoning resort investors, concocting elaborate tales about my terrorist threats and schemes to undermine the development. The paranoia was clearly taking its toll. On Thursday evening, she convened her own emergency HOA meeting. The purpose was clear: to brand me a clear and present danger to community safety and to authorize any measures needed to safeguard the resort investment. I entered that meeting accompanied by Patricia and Frank, carrying a folder filled with documents capable of ending Linda's control for good. The community center was thick with the scent of nervous tension and cheap cologne. It was obvious that Linda's allies had been busy packing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," I stated, rising during the public comment section, "I wish to offer a final proposal to settle this matter." I laid out my water rights documents on the table, followed by the resort's loan agreements and evidence of Linda's financial misconduct. I retain my bridge as a historically protected landmark. In return, I will ensure minimum water levels for the resort's operations and support architectural review for all new buildings. The room fell into a profound silence. You could almost see Linda's mind racing to comprehend what was before her. "This is blackmail," she finally managed to hiss. "You are threatening to ruin a $4 million investment because you refuse to adhere to basic community guidelines." Patricia rose to her feet with practiced ease. "Mrs. Prescott, my client is not making threats. He is offering to secure your water supply in exchange for respecting his grandfathered property rights. This is known as negotiation." Linda's face flushed to the color of a boiled lobster. "I do not negotiate with terrorists. This board will not be intimidated by environmental extremism." It was then that Frank Wilson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Jake holds legal authority over the secondary water management that predates your entire development by 80 years. This isn't extremism, it's established property law." The vote was quick and unsurprising. Linda's board dismissed the compromise 6-2, with only Mrs. Chun and old Mr. Patterson voting for negotiation. Linda appeared to believe she had secured some sort of triumph. "Mr. Morrison, She declared with a theatrical air of self-satisfaction. Your threats are meaningless here. This community will not yield to your strong-arm tactics. As I walked out of that meeting, the sound of gravel beneath my boots felt like a countdown. Linda had been given every chance to resolve this amicably. She had chosen escalation over reason. The following morning brought news that confirmed Linda's desperation had reached a new low. Tom Rodriguez called me before sunrise, his voice strained with anxiety. Jake, you should know, Linda offered me $10,000 in cash to damage the dam controls. She said it would be made to look like an equipment malfunction, and you would take the fall for any resulting damage. $10,000. Linda was so desperate to maintain control that she had progressed from harassment to attempted bribery and outright sabotage. What did you say to her, Tom? I told her I'd consider it. Then I contacted the sheriff. They're launching an investigation but wanted me to inform you that she's becoming a real danger. That afternoon, I received a visit from Deputy Martinez. Linda had lodged a fresh complaint, alleging I had made explicit terrorist threats against the dam and the resort. The deputy was professional but visibly unconvinced. Mr. Morrison, I have to inquire. Have you made any remarks about damaging the resort or endangering public safety? I provided him with copies of all my legal papers and Patricia's contact details. Deputy, every action I intend to take is fully compliant with state water rights law. If Mrs. Prescott views legal dam operations as terrorism, that speaks more to her grasp of the law than to my intentions. After he departed, I updated Patricia. Her reaction was immediate and firm. Jake, attempted bribery and filing false police reports are serious offenses. We are pursuing federal charges under water rights interference laws. But more importantly, you need to act quickly. If Linda is this desperate, she might attempt something genuinely illegal. That evening, I sat on my dock, watching the sun dip below the horizon and feeling the metallic taste of adrenaline. Linda had spurned negotiation, attempted bribery, and filed false police reports. She had made her decision. On Monday morning, I would make mine.